Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. It's all about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the newest album from James McMurtry, titled Complicated Game. You know, it's rare that country music gets angry these days. You know, get the blood pumping for a righteous cause. Something that might cause someone to load up a shotgun, grab a bottle of hard bourbon or moonshine, and then roll out to go kick some ass. You know, the part of me that loves outlaw country has always had a certain fondness for this brand of music. But it's gotten increasingly rare in the modern day, especially in the mainstream, and especially when the causes behind a lot of these music that does come out tends to develop an isolationist streak that doesn't exactly wear well. Doesn't exactly surprise me here because, like it or not, most of country is a conservative genre. And considering most country songwriters, they don't tell dark stories anymore when they tell stories at all, it means that the anger can come across as kind of reactionary, and that rarely ever works out well, especially when the cause can be, well, let's call it less than just. And let's be clear, this has been an issue for decades now, not just now, but a particularly ugly side of it reared up in the mid-2000s, because country was a genre that got increasingly torn on political lines. As much as I don't like the Dixie Chicks, like at all, there's a certain righteous rage to Not Ready to Make Nice getting tarred and feathered by the country establishment being anti-Bush on the war on terror when it wasn't popular, even though they turned out to be right. Now look, history has vindicated the Dixie Chicks, years too late for it to matter, but the issue that I always took with their statements, musical or otherwise, was that their framing can come across as, well, a little bit preachy, which really is the classic example of the biggest and most accurate criticism hurled at liberals like me these days, in that they're not populist and they consider themselves above the common discourse. If liberals are so goddamn smart and they want to help everybody, why do we then talk down to the audience or not show real empathy or really manage to make that connection? That's a constant problem in today's day and age. Because you want to know who did this approach a hell of a lot better? Singer-songwriter James McMurtry. Born in Texas, originally country singer in the 90s, but it wasn't until 2005 and his critically acclaimed album Childish Things that he really struck gold with me with songs like We Can't Make It Here Anymore, that struck the perfect political balance and was named by acclaimed music critic Robert Christgau as the best song of the decade, and really, it's a contender. Nuanced, harshly critical, and pointing the finger at the right people, framed as speaking with the people and not down to them, and with a real simmering undercurrent of rage that underscored every brutal detail of his material, it's a damn great song. It also helped matters the guy was a great songwriter who had excellent production, a ton of texture, and very solid hooks. The man didn't just write great music, he wrote great stories with detail and humanity that you could easily imagine and slot yourself into. Throw in thematic cohesion and a solid as hell performance behind the microphone, and you can bet this guy won me over. Now, he followed up Childish Things with Just Us Kids in 2008, which kept the sharper writing but cranked up the anger a little hotter with harsher, more aggressive grooves. That was all positive, I might add. But then, for nearly 7 years, he seemed to disappear with only a live album holding us over. And yet, now one of the best songwriters in the industry is back with a brand new record. And I gotta admit, I was a little bit concerned. Does the fire hold now that Bush and Cheney, they're long gone? Well, I wouldn't say that the fire has gone out so much as it has changed and shifted, becoming more weathered and tired and, well, mature. Sure, we're not getting the direct political tracks, but that doesn't mean there aren't social commentary tracks on it. It's just filtered through a different lens, not as swampy and rugged and seething with rage, but tempered with the weary resignation that comes with age and time. James McMurtry had titled his last two records Childish Things and Just Us Kids, and while he's always been more mature than the titles implied, this is the one where the framing really changed. In other words, he kind of grew up. So is the album as good? Well, in a way, it's kind of hard to gauge and compare them. There is an immediacy to the punch of Just Us Kids that it's not here on this album, and I'm not sure there's a classic song like We Can't Make It Here Anymore, but that doesn't mean this album isn't goddamn great all the same. A definite standout thus far this year in terms of country music, songwriting, and storytelling and music that I'm glad I finally got the chance to cover. In other words, you should all be getting out to get this album because it's fantastic. So okay, what has changed here since 2008? Well, the first big shift is in the instrumentation. The choice to ease back on the politically tinged anger means more of this album has a slightly more laid back, more acoustic leaning approach. Although we do get some thicker, more roiling grooves on the solo of She Loves Me, or the swampy How I'm Gonna Find You Now with its bass line. But that's not saying there aren't varieties to the instrumentation or the great, warm, organic texture hasn't been preserved in a way that balances the grittier percussion and the guitars where every single strum is captured in detail. The organ elements on You Got to Me and Carlisle's Hall, the steel guitar on South Dakota, the doo-wop elements on She Loves Me, the thicker, heavier tones of Copper Canteen and These Things I've Come to Know, and especially those Uilleann pipes on Long Island Sound, they all sound fantastic. I think most of McMurtry's work, it falls more in the balance of acoustic folk than pure country, but now the blend is even more pronounced thanks to the stronger acoustic focus. And McMurtry's subtle balance of emotions through his vocals that he can convey through his rough edge yet very smooth delivery, it's damn impressive. Now, if I were to nitpick here, I would say I do miss some of the harder edged and lo-fi elements that came from McMurtry's own production in comparison to that of C.C. Adcock, but it does fit more given the subject matter on display, so I'm giving it a pass here. But of course, we need to talk about the songwriting, shall we? Now, I could go on and on for hours about McMurtry's brand of well-established and excellently framed poetry. This guy doesn't just have an incredibly solid grasp of meter and flow, but the stories he tells have layers of complexity, flawed narrators that reveal a lot more about themselves within the details than they probably intend to let on. One of the distinctive things about McMurtry as a songwriter is that when he writes from the first person, he's not always writing his story, but from narrators that could range from fishermen to a soldier coming home to the cold, drought-ridden prairie of South Dakota to a Long Island middle-class businessman with kids who left his home in Oklahoma behind. And it's very important to note here there's more detail than narrative on this album. He's aiming to set scenes, capture moments, fragmented pictures that have got a lot more hidden between the lines. And more importantly, he doesn't always frame the narrator as always being in the right or having always made the right choices. Hell, you could make the argument that he's almost more of an observer than active participant in these stories, which some could argue weakens the dramatic stakes of the songs overall, but I'd argue there's more to it than that, which leads to a real discussion of themes. Now, I get the feeling McMurtry himself would argue that each song is a self-contained story, and that looking for an overarching theme on this album, it's probably reaching a little bit. And you know, it probably is, but there does seem to be a thematic undercurrent to this record, and that is maturity and time. It's something that seems to have crept up on our narrators on these songs almost out of nowhere. Precious time wasted or just slipped away beyond them knowing it. Take the pseudo-wedding song You Got to Me, where he's watching an old flame get married, but there's not really anger or bitterness to this song, just a sense of wistful longing, a reminiscence of that memory. Not a lot of bad feelings, just kind of pleasant looking on. It's a sign of maturity that crops up again on songs like She Loves Me, where his partner seems to have a fling that the narrator seems very well aware of that she's going on, and yet he knows she'll return because, well, she does love him. These things that I've come to know, it's very similar, albeit a little bit simpler. It's a song admiring a girl like you typically see, but less for her body and physical assets and more for her self-reliance and street smarts. Things that people value more as you get older because it's more maturity, it's actual intelligence, the things in her head instead of the things on her chest. But how much we value that maturity and time, that's an entirely different question on this album. From the desire to head back to a simpler time on South Dakota to the musings of remembrance after dying on Deaver's Crossing. But the album really lands its harshest blow, at least for me, on Long Island Sound, which begins with a fragment of a song the narrator once wrote, but never sang as life caught up with him. Oh, he's got a good job and kids he needs to take to soccer practice, and this simpler, rougher life he left behind, he did leave it behind. And what I find fascinating about the song is that it doesn't take a real side in its tone. He shows his frustration and longing for the past, yet that's an antiquated past that's represented by a shrill mother saying the kids will not have a grounding in their faith because they don't go to church and he's not forcing them, but also by the guitar he's got stored back in his closet and what he finds in his truck hunting for the jack when he needs to fix his tire. But the song also points out the good things he's gotten in Long Island, in security and stability in that sing-along chorus. It's the commitment to showing both sides of the story that makes the Complicated Game, the album, well, complicated. But you know what? That's a natural factor of maturity if you get there, especially when you feel caught up by life and don't have the same flexibility to just change on a whim. If anything is to remain sacred on this album, is that what shouldn't change? History, which only exists as long as we fight to preserve it. And when we can look at it with fresh eyes and greater perspective that comes with maturity, we should not let it go. We should fight for it because it shapes us and the culture around us. Gives us a window to a simpler time that we should cherish even though we shouldn't wear nostalgic glasses. In short, that history made us who we are and we should respect that. In short, James McMurtry's complicated game may have taken a long time to get here, but oh god, it was worth it. A stunningly well-written, excellently performed, genuinely deep record that shows he can transition from political fire into something that's a lot more small-scale, yet no less human and powerful. For me, it's a light 9 out of 10, an extremely high recommendation. Folks, we haven't had a lot of country records yet this year, and even here I feel I'm a little bit late to the punch covering it, but trust me when I say that James McMurtry's complicated game, definitely worth your time. Check this out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Is there anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or any other albums you want me to take a look at, that I'd be more than happy to give them a listen. Until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.